Well, you know from the history series that we've been watching that Unitarian is not a new religion. We've been around for a long time. But did you know that the first Unitarian congregation in Iowa was in Burlington in 1840? There was no Unitarian service in Des Moines, though, until 1877. But before there was a Unitarian congregation in Des Moines, there was a Universalist society, which most of us probably don't know about. The Universalist actually had a building at 6th and Cherry in downtown Des Moines that was formed in approximately 1860, but was disbanded in 1874 before the Unitarians came to town in 1877. If you look up Des Moines in 1877 on a Google search, you'll find three things listed. Number one, a population of about 16,000 for the city. Second was the great train wreck at 4 Mile Creek that made the news. And third, the Unitarian Church was founded with 9 charter members. The early days of the church were not easy. A quote from a minister, from the first minister in about 1880, said, "December 5th, we began a course of historical lectures in the Academy of Music building. We held services there for 6 Sundays under the most discouraging circumstances. The hall was not warmed, so people nearly froze and would not come out. The extreme cold weather made it necessary to have the remainder of the lectures in a small hall on Locust Street. I have received from this church $40 a month for $400 for the year's service." But despite the hardships, the congregation decided to pursue a building in 1881. A lot was donated to the church by Mary Wright, who was the wife of a U.S. Senator, George Wright, but the site, which we don't know where it was decided that it was not suitable for the building, and so it was traded for a lot at 15th and Linden. That first building was dedicated on December 3rd of 1882. The church stayed in that building for 23 years. It's not clear exactly what caused them to move, but it appears that the new owners wanted the building immediately because the congregation held services at the Jewish temple, then located at 8th and Pleasant Street, until their new building was completed. That original church building at 15th and Ingersoll has disappeared into the unknown. We don't know exactly where it was, but as near as I can figure out, it's now the middle of the intersection of 15th and Ingersoll, right where Ingersoll kind of bends north to meet High Street. The congregation at that time then purchased a lot at 11th and High, just 4 blocks east of that first building. Again, we don't know exactly where the church was, but it's now either a parking lot or a parking garage, depending on which corner of that intersection it was on. Well, excavation for the new building started in January of 1904, and the building was dedicated on April 5th of 1905. If you notice as you come into this building, the cornerstone from that building is set in the corner of this building that was put there when the addition was built on about 20 years ago. And you notice the date on it is 1904. Well, much of the enthusiasm and also the financial support for that building came from the minister at the time. Anybody remember who that might have been? Does the name Mary Safford sound familiar? She was apparently very enthusiastic about constructing the building and ultimately donated a fair amount of the financial support that was necessary to build it. That building at 11th and High served as a congregation's home for 50 years. During those 50 years, the congregation continued to face some very hard times, including 2 world wars and the Great Depression. There are many stories from that period about how our congregation served the community and the country with our UU commitment to justice and compassion for everyone. By 1954, the church was faced with what sounds today like some very familiar problems. Not enough parking space and an aging building that needed major maintenance. While debating about what to do with the building at that point, the church received an unexpected offer to purchase the property, so the problem was solved. The property was sold in January of 1955. And at that same meeting, the church accepted a donation of 4.5 acres of property where? On Bell Avenue, just east of Fleur Drive. It was given by Amos Emery as a memorial to his parents who had been longtime members of the congregation. The new owners of the High Street property took possession immediately. So the congregation met at the YWCA building, the old YWCA that was down at 9th and High, until a new building, this building, was completed. As many of you know, Amos Emery was also an architect, and he designed this building. And it was built by another familiar name, Lovejoy Construction. John Lovejoy was also an active member of the congregation at that time. From the dedication ceremony, we have this statement: "The church will seek to serve the whole man and the whole community. From it, there will come the hopes and ideals for a better world." And I can only hope that we have continued that tradition. Some observations from the original building construction. We have the original construction drawings, both paper copies, but we also have scanned copies of all of the original drawings. They're beautiful, hand-drawn drawings that just show every detail of construction of this building. And it's really interesting that it was built to the letter to meet those drawings. Everything about the church is exactly as shown in those original drawings. The cornerstone, as I already mentioned, was salvaged from the old church, was salvaged and moved to this property, where it was ultimately incorporated into the wall when the office addition was constructed in 2006. The creek culvert that you have heard so much about recently was installed with the original building. So that culvert has been there now for 70 years. But the sidewalk ended at the creek. The sidewalk went from the church down and just across the culvert, and from there, it's not clear, but appears it was a gravel path out to a gravel parking lot where our current east parking lot is. The north end of the lower level, if you think about downstairs from basically the area north, the library, conference room, and the classrooms to the north, was not finished when the original building was constructed. And in fact, it was basically blocked off and didn't even have a concrete floor. There was just dirt floor and nothing else back there. No walls, no ceiling, other than the structural ceiling. Most of you at least, are aware that the building was designed also to be not just a church, but to accommodate the drama workshop. Hence the sloped floor, the theater-style seating, the stage that was really set up for theatrical productions. And some of you may also remember what's now the large activity room was the workshop for constructing sets for drama workshop. But then do you know how they got the sets from the large activity room up to the stage? Some of you do. Pat remembers. There was a trap door behind the curtain that's pretty good size. It was like 10 feet by 5 feet that opened up so they could bring their sets up from the lower level to the stage to set up for the productions. And a personal note on that, the first time that I was ever in this building was in 1967 when our theater group from Iowa State came down to see a production of the drama workshop that was done in what is now Griffin Hall, where bleachers were set up so that it was done in the round with seating all the way around the outside or the walls of Griffin Channing Hall. And do you remember where the church offices were at that time? The church offices were all in what is now the gathering area. So we had a minister's office, a secretary's office, and a library in that space. And there was also a storage room where all the chairs and tables from what was then called Channing Hall were stored at that point. And that all became the gathering area when we did the remodeling. So at this point, Theresa is going to tell us a little bit about the grounds and what she remembers from the history.
Okay, I haven't seen pictures, but Bill Paxton told me that when this church was first built, there were virtually no trees, and now we have this wonderful forest. We also have every known invasive species in our woods, and we are trying desperately to get rid of it, but it takes work, and it takes more people to show up that are younger than 65 years old. My hip is screaming at me just from pruning stuff yesterday. We do have 20-plus species of birds in our woods, a family of deer. We did have a family of beaver, but thankfully they were relocated. And we need to have, I'm going to try to schedule a work day in September to work on the woods. I know when we do the capital campaign, there will be work more extensive, but until that money gets raised and we actually start doing that, we need you guys and everybody else to show up and fight the Greenbrier and other things. And so Al's got some more to talk about the building, and then I'll be back for something else, because I got into something yesterday when I was weeding.
Well, after the building was built, not much. The first remodeling came just 8 years after the building was built. At that point, the lower level was finished. As we talked about, it was unfinished to begin with, and the paved parking lot was put in where our east parking lot is now located. It's not clear if it was built per the plans, but if it was shaped quite differently than it is today, so things have changed over the years. After that remodeling, not much changed until 2005, when a plan to expand the building was advanced. After a thorough discussion, those of you who were around at that time may remember that, we considered all possible alternatives, including selling the building, moving to a new west suburban location, splitting the congregation so some would stay here and some would move. After all the discussion, it was decided to go ahead with an expansion of the building. And during that expansion, we added the new office area, so everything that's back now in the office space used to be front yard. We expanded the bathrooms. We put a new roof on the building. We converted the old office space to the gathering area, added new fire alarms and building security systems, upgraded the mechanical and electrical systems, including the geothermal heating and cooling for the office space. All of that was completed almost 20 years ago now in 2006. Between 2006 and now, several plans had been discussed to provide additional upgrades and expansions, but we never found quite the right combination of ingredients to make it work. The only major change that's happened in the past 20 years was the kitchen remodeling, done about in 2022 and 23. And now, as you've all heard, we're planning for the next phase. The next phase is going to not expand the building, but do some enhancements to it, some additions, and some major maintenance issues that have been needed for quite some time. Teresa, did you want to say anything else about the future of the grounds?
If you're beginning, I think like me, you look at poison ivy and you get a rash, we do have adopt a plot for the landscaped portions of the property, which as grounds transition more to the woods, the landscape was kind of ignored. So if you want to talk about that and maybe adopting a plot, you can talk to me after the service. And also the playground is included in that area. So, but some of them are very nominal. Some of them going to take some serious work. And maybe there'll be a work day just focusing on the gardens by the back wall of the auditorium. But other than that, we need people to take pride in this, just like you do take pride in your own garden at home. And so that's all I've got to say. Al, you got something else?
Well, we have come a long way since that first church was built in 1882. That first church had an architecture that was very fitting for a small Midwest town that was Des Moines in that year. Then on to the 1904 building that was really had a majestic feel with its grand staircase leading up to the main entrance to the building. And finally, to where we are today, in that mid-century modern design of our current building. But through it all, we have kept the unique UU commitment to freedom of belief, respect for our earth, and a belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Beyond the church buildings, how many of you remember that we also had a parsonage, not just one, but two, and almost three. The first parsonage was purchased in 1949, located at 2600 35th Street, between Holcomb and Sheridan, just 2 blocks north of Hickman. That parsonage was used from 49 until 1966. After the church moved to this site, it was then felt the parsonage was too far away, so they needed one that was closer to the building on the south side. At that point, they sold the house on 35th Street and purchased a new house at 4909 Southwest 15th, just a block south of McKinley off of Southwest 14th Street. And some of you may remember that John Isom lived in that house until he retired in 1954. And at that point, then, the parsonage was sold. There was a plan at that point to build a parsonage on this property. I believe it was south of basically the south parking lot. Fortunately, thankfully, that plan was dropped before we started construction. Much of the material that we've talked about this morning came from a history of the First Unitarian Church that was written by Oval Quist in 1977. We have a scanned copy of this history. I'm going to see if we can't get it up on the Realm website, but any of you that would like to have it, I'd be glad to share it with you. It is really an interesting, well done, well documented history that I would really urge all of you to take a look at and to read. Now, we need a new historian to bring this history up to date. Would one of you be willing to take on the project so that when we have our 150th anniversary in just 2 years, we'll have a current history to work with at that time? It would be a great project for someone who is interested in the history of the church and where we are and where we've come from, and I think it'd be a very interesting, fun thing to work on. Well, we've come a long way, but buildings are not just a place to come into, have a meeting, and then leave. Buildings, as I see them, have character and they have life. They have an inner working that can be beautiful and frustrating. I have great respect for this building. I love this building. And even when we're debating what in the world we should do with the latest problem that's come up that needs immediate attention, I still think it is a grand old building. I'd like to close with a short quote from the final sermon that was given in High Street from the minister that was also his last sermon because he was leaving Des Moines. And what he said about that church, I think applies to this church just as well. He said, I almost feel married to this building. It has provided that same combination of frustration and affection which usually makes up love. I have spent some of the pleasantest hours with you in it, painting, carpentering, glazing windows, sanding floors, one night from sundown till the next morning sunrise when time was running out on finishing a project. Also, I am deeply aware of the human history and the church history that's embodied here. My hope is that the building is torn down soon after we leave it. She is a fine lady and should not stand long in idleness or for any other purpose.